computer. Okay, so we are now on page Roman numeral 12 of the introduction. We're on the second paragraph, contemporary studies. You have that?
Yeah, contemporary studies in the fields of linguistics and critical theory hardly permit the belief in a value-free judgment or an innocent reading, whereby the reader is capable of objectively grasping the mind of the author in all of its pristine purity.
Okay, let me just explain a couple of things before we go on so that this is so that the sentence is clear. So first of all, linguistics. Linguistics is, of course, the study of language. The study of language can include various things from morphology, syntax, semantics, phonetics. So the study of language in general is called linguistics. Linguistics is really important to understanding Torah. If you don't understand linguistics, you can't understand the thinking of the Chachamim. Why do I say that? Because in Jewish thought, it is always the text that is at the foundation of all belief systems, of all behavioral norms, of all political institutions. It is always the text being either the written text, which is the Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, or the oral text, which is the Torah Shebe'al Peh, but it's always a text. And because we put such an emphasis on the text, linguistics is absolutely essential to being a Talmid Chacham. If you don't understand linguistics, you cannot be a Talmid Chacham because you don't understand how to approach text and you don't understand the science of language. That's number one. Okay, so there are contemporary studies, this book I think was published in the 70s, so contemporary back then, in the fields of linguistics and critical theory. I want to deal a little with critical theory because again, or literary theory, because what you have here is how do you approach a text? So linguistics is language, put that on the side. Now let's go to the actual text. How do you approach a text, okay? And what critical theory says is that any time you approach a text, there are a set of concepts and there are a set of assumptions that you use when you interpret a text, meaning there is no naked reading of a text. It's not like, if I'm a mathematician, 1 + 1 = 2. That's a perfect message. It's in my mind. I put it on paper. You see it with your mind, 1 + 1 = 2. There is no tension between ideality and articulation. It's perfect. I think so. I mean, I'm not a mathematician. Maybe mathematicians will disagree with that. I don't care because this is not a class about mathematics. But in literary theory, there is an understanding that there is a tension between a text, what the author has an idea in his mind. He transforms that idea into a text. Let's say it's a written text. And then somebody else now reads the text. When somebody else reads the text, literary theory says that there are a set of assumptions that he makes in reading the text. So for example, if you are a Jew, you are a member of the Berit, you entered your parents and you entered into a Berit in Har Sinai. When you read the Torah Shebichtav, what is the most primary, fundamental assumption that you make when you read the Torah Shebichtav? And the answer is the Torah Shebe'al Peh. Okay? But it's always like that. Any text is based on certain assumptions. So that's what I needed to convey to you. There's no such thing as an innocent reading. Just, get a dictionary, translate the words, and you have an innocent reading. And by the way, when people study Chumash nowadays, they make that mistake, and it's a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake. It's an ignorant mistake. They think they could just interpret the words of the Chumash. Oh, and the Chumash says this. Well, look what it says. The Hachamim were wrong. That's just ignorant. That's not just ignorant in Judaism. That's not just ignorance of Judaism, but it's ignorance of how text and how the relation between the text and the reader, how it all works. They just, they're clueless.
I may ask, I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a second for the sake of the show.
Give me all you got, man.
Of course. When people read Tanakh, a lot of times they give it an interpretation based on, so to speak, peshat understanding of the text. You see that a lot of times in the Regio, for example. He gives it a new interpretation based on his understanding of the peshat, the way he was able to delve into the text.
Okay.
What do you say about that? I'm playing devil's advocate because I understand what you're saying. I'm just going to ask like the famous question for the sake of the shiur.
That's a good question. It's a fair question. A part of the purpose of this book is to elaborate upon understanding how it all works. But let me tell you, nevertheless, at this point, that yes, there is room for interpretation. Okay? There is room for ingenuity and there is room for hidushim. There's always going to be hidushim in Bet Midrash and Shama Hidush, right? That's correct. But any chidushim happen within a particular framework. Regio, Radak, Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, they all operate within a certain framework. It's not a free-for-all. If you are part of the Berit and you accepted the Torah Shebe'al Peh and the wisdom of the Hachamim over the generations, and that's your framework, then please open the text, read it, because there is no Bet Midrash which doesn't have Chidushim. The problem is that people think you can be outside the framework, outside the cultural and intellectual milieu of Hachamim, of the Gemara, Hachamim of Andalus, Hachamim of the Geonim, and just throw any interpretation you want, and that interpretation is valid. And that's why you have in the Gemara the concept of Derasha Shel Dofi. What is a derasha shel dofi? Oh, what's wrong with it? Why is one derasha shel dofi and not the other? Because derasha shel dofi means this is an incongruent, literally an incongruent derasha. This derasha does not conform with our system of Torah, with our system of reading, with our particular assumptions. You understand?
I would also add that there's a difference between a textual understanding of the Torah and interpretations based on a textual understanding of the Torah, what it says, and an interpretation based on things that it doesn't say in the Torah, much like a midrashic style interpretation, where they add things which aren't anywhere to be found.
Right.
They'll say certain things. Oh, Moshe Rabbeinu was this, he was that, and lo katuv b'shum makom. Those are the real dirashot shel dof.
Yeah. I mean, they do terrible things to the Torah, and they wouldn't do this to any other text. Can you imagine if I approached William Shakespeare's Macbeth like it was a rabbinic Talmudic discussions? I mean, that would be disrespectful to William Shakespeare and to all the people for whom William Shakespeare wrote Macbeth. So I wouldn't do that. What gives them, Jews who do not follow Torah and Mitzvot, Goyim who do not follow Torah and Mitzvot, but they are supposedly academicians, professors, intellectuals, but they do for the Torah, but they won't do to any other thing. They read it independently of our particular lay mental, Torah Shebe'al Peh. But there's a lot to say about this, so let's try to cover a little more ground.
So the intimate relationship between a people's well-tenshong, or comprehensive view of the world, and its specific inner sprach form.
Continue. Say that sentence again because we got cut off. The particular, was it relationship or the intimate relationship?
The intimate relationship between people's Weltanschauung, or comprehensive view of the world in its specific inner sprach form, inner linguistic form, was already established by Wilhelm von Humboldt.
Okay, this is very amok. So I want to just, I just want to digest this intellectually a little. So on the one hand, we just said that there is no naked reading of a text. But here's the amazing thing, and this is a point that Shteda is making. It's not just that there is no naked reading of a text, but also when you read reality around you, when you look at the objective world around you, the way you read the world is dependent upon your inner linguistic mechanism. Meaning, there is a baby. The baby has a brain. He does not yet speak. He hears the adults around him talking. And as the adults around him talk, he learns the syntax of the language and he becomes an expert, an absolute expert in syntax. So a German baby, which is 6 months old, has a knowledge of the syntax of the German language that you will never, ever be able to attain at your age because you never spoke German before. So that syntax shapes the brain of that baby. And now when he views the world, there was no naked view of the world. The way he views the world is structured in accordance with the inner form created by the particular language that he speaks. That's an incredible thing. So that's a great chidush. The great chidush is, oh, well, why do I have to read the language? I'm sorry, why do I have to read the text in a particular way? Why can't I just do it independently? And the answer is, you're never doing anything independently. You're not reading a text independently. You're coming with a preconceived inner linguistic form, and you're not even reading reality independently. Even that is not just objective, but rather you are superimposing certain structures upon reality, and those structures determine how you perceive the very world around you. And that's an amazing thing. Let's continue.
Intellectual peculiarity and the linguistic conformation of a people are related by such an intimate fusion that given the one, the other could be entirely derived from it.
Right. So what he's saying is everybody has a particular intellectual proclivity from culture to culture, and from language to language. And what William von Humboldt is saying is that the way you think, that intellectual proclivity is not something you just made up. It's not. You think it is. Oh, yeah, I'm a free thinker. No, you're not a free thinker. Rather, the language you speak, from that language, we can almost derive the particular things that you consider to be logical and the particular things that you consider to be illogical.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point of Wilhelm von Humboldt, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name.
For intellectuality and language permit and promote only mutually agreeable formations.
Yes. Right. What you think is logical, by the way, if I give you a logical argument right now, it's because of the language we speak. In our language, our particular linguistic structures and forms allow for a particular logic.
I think this a philosopher who nicely develops this point, which Deda spoke about a lot, is Ludwig Wittgenstein, who says in his Tractatus, in this book, which I've never had the zichut to read, but I've only read about, that the limits of human logic and philosophy are bound by the language each human speaks.
Right.
In other words, and this may encompass that. I mean, if I speak English and Arabic, some of the logic in my English apparatus may also be encompassed in my Arabic apparatus. But sometimes it's different. And where it's different, it's different.
Right. Interesting.
Language, for intellectuality and language permit and promote only mutually agreeable formations. Language, as it were, the external manifestation of the minds of the peoples. Their language is their soul, and their soul is their language.
Right, right. So therefore, we understand, as I said, that the language is the inner form. That inner form shapes the mind. The way the person perceives reality is based upon the shape and structure of his mind. What the person considers to be logical and correct ways of thinking are actually just derivatives of his particular language. I don't remember which Jedi wrote this. Maybe he wrote this here, and maybe we'll see it soon. But for example, Greek logic, Aristotelian logic, is absolutely connected with the Greek language. And what Aristotle considered to be logical was logical to Aristotle and to other Greek thinking and other Greek speaking people because they spoke that language. But if, for example, you're an Arabic speaking Jew.
You're talking about monolingualism?
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's where he brings it. I'm not sure where he brings that particular.
And I know that he speaks about it for sure in the horizontal society. Yeah, that whole.
Yes, probably. So, and conversely, what perhaps a Hindi-speaking Indian considers to be logical, for me would be absurd, right? But because I don't speak his language, right? I speak a different language. So without sounding overly monolingual, but this I'm saying on my own. I don't know that Deda would share this view that I'm about to tell you now, but I do believe that there's a connection between Leshon Hakodesh, and a particular approach to the world. I know that sounds monolingual in itself. It's not, because we're aware of what's happening around us. So notwithstanding what I just said, I don't believe we're monolingual. We're not. Jella showed that in many of his writings, but I believe that the Leshon HaKodesh is a special language, as it gives you a view of the world that is more aligned with the Chokhmah Elahit. Again, this is me speaking. This is not Jeda, and he may even have disagreed. I never shared these thoughts with him. I
Hmm.
believe he would have agreed with me, but nevertheless, I have to be circumspect.
Similarly, Fritz Mauthner observed
Oh,
that
okay. Here it is.
if Aristotle had spoken Chinese or Dakota, his logic and rational categories would have been different.
How do you
In the
like
same
that?
in the same fashion, Ernest Cassirer wrote, all the concepts of theoretical knowledge constitute merely an upper stratum of logic, which is founded upon a lower stratum, that of the logic of language. Very interesting.
Right. So we have,
Logic is bound within the language we speak.
right. So all the concept of theoretical knowledge is an upper stratum of logic, but below that, there's a lower stratum. So the lower stratum, the deep inner sprachform, how do we say that? Inner, where is it? Inner linguistic form, inner sprachform. That's the inner, that's the language. But this is the amkut of the pasuk in Tehillim. That's the language. That's what structures the mind. And then the logic, or the knowledge that comes from that inner sprachform, that is just the derivative. It is a derivative of the language. This is the amkut of the pasuk in Tehillim. "Mipi olelim veyonekim misav ta'oz למען סורריך להשבית אויב ומתנקם," because the olelim veyonekim are learning the Leshon HaKodesh, and as they learn the Leshon HaKodesh, they develop a certain wisdom, and that wisdom is lehashbit oyev umitnakem. Again, my theory is that the Leshon HaKodesh is a type of structuring of the mind that is aligned with the Chokhmah HaElahit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we studied enough for today, unless you feel that we should continue, or let's go
Okay.
another 5 minutes. We only did 11 minutes. Okay, let's do another 5 minutes.
In this country, Edward Sapir pointed up the close relationship between a particular language and its culture.
Right.
As the pioneer investigation of Benjamin Lee Whorf has shown, no individual is free to describe nature with absolute impartiality, but is constrained to certain modes of interpretation, even while he thinks himself most free.
Yeah, so
The
even when you describe nature, you are describing certain things about nature. For example, we say, what a beautiful flower. Well, you're saying what a beautiful flower because your eyes perceive particular wavelengths of light. It's just the way our eyes are designed. We cannot see other wavelengths of light. So we're just describing a particular aspect of the flower. What do we describe? What are we actually describing? We're describing those wavelengths of light that were not absorbed by the atoms or the electrons, however that works. And even there, we're not even we're not even looking at all of the wavelengths that are let out. We can also look at the temperature of the flower, right? There's many things we can look at about the flower, but we see it's a pretty flower. So when you say it's a pretty flower, it's a very limited statement, right? It's limited to your mind and to people who have a mind like you, right?
The close relationship between language, one second, yeah. The close relationship between language and sensory perception is particularly evident at the auditory level.
This is
Roman
fascinating.
Jacobson, here it'll be explained, has pointed out that minute and extremely subtle phonemic differences, which are sometimes difficult to detect, even with modern instruments, can be accurately distinguished by the human ear on condition that they are rigorously and intimately conjoined with specific meanings.
Right, so what this means is, if in your language there is a particular sound, and that sound is part of the spoken language, and you use it, you will be able to hear that sound, notwithstanding that the sound may be very, very subtle and so imperceptible that even instruments cannot detect the sound, but you can hear it very well. So here we see how our perception of the world is not an objective perception. We perceive what the language allows us to perceive. Similarly, in colors, we perceive colors because our language has certain words for those colors, and therefore it structures the way we perceive the colors.
Mm-hmm.
If our language had different words for those colors, we may see more subtle colors than we would see otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So our very perception of the world is completely subjectivized to the structuring of our minds caused by the language we speak.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a quote.
Modeling, so the minutest phonic differences, to the extent that they perform a discriminative role in a given language, are accurately perceived by all the native speakers of that language without exception. Whereas a foreigner, even a trained observer, or even a professional linguist often has difficulty in perceiving these differences if they do not perform this discriminative function in his native language.
Right. And that's so amok. What is the criteria through which determines that you will hear that sound? If that sound has a nafkamina in the language, if
Mm-hmm.
that sound determines meaning, is determinative of meaning, then you will hear the sound. If the
Mm-hmm.
sound does not have any nafkamina with respect to meaning, does not determine the meaning of words, you will not hear that sound. By the way, if you ever try to study the Chinese language, it's almost impossible for us English speakers because we can't even hear the very words. Like we can't even hear the very, it's almost impossible for us to hear what for them is natural to hear. And perhaps
Mm-hmm.
the sounds that we say that maybe they don't hear quite well. Nevertheless,
Mm-hmm.
I think the point is clear. So let's just summarize what we said. The whole approach of the Wissenschaft des Studentum, as if though you can look at a text as at a people, as if though it's a some sort of objective reality out there that you can study scientifically. It is wrong at so many levels. It is wrong at the level of critical theory, which says that anytime you approach any text, you come with preconceived notions. But even more fundamentally wrong, it is wrong even at the level of the world around us, because we speak about objective reality. And it turns out that objective reality is not quite so objective. And we're quite subjective in what we consider to be the objective world around us. Later on comes quantum mechanics, which further demonstrates the veracity of the subjectivity of reality. It demonstrates that quite powerfully with double slit experiment and other such fun stuff. But nevertheless, are there any questions before we bid farewell? I know it's quite late in your place.
No, no.
Okay. Okay, Joey, always a pleasure.
ברוך אדוני לעולם, אמן
Amen. Amen.
ואמן.